You know that feeling when you're flipping through channels on a sick day, land on something you've seen a dozen times, and somehow still can't make yourself change it? For an entire generation, that movie is Overboard. And if you've ever tried to explain the plot to someone who hasn't seen it, you know how quickly their face goes from curious to concerned? Overboard landed in theaters on December 16th, 1987, and gave us one of the most improbable romances of the decade. Part screwball comedy, part revenge fantasy, part argument for never hiring someone and then refusing to pay them. Goldie Hawn played Joanna Staten, a socialite so cartoonishly awful that her own crew cheers when a stranger tells her off. Kurt Russell played Dean Prophet, a widowed carpenter with 4 genuinely feral sons, a house held together by stubbornness, and a grudge he is absolutely going to do something about. Edward Herrmann played Grant, Joanna's husband, who visits her at the hospital after she falls overboard, recognizes an opportunity in her amnesia, denies knowing her, and quietly sails away to party with younger women on the yacht. And Roddy McDowall played Andrew the butler, who has witnessed all of it every day for years, and whose expression throughout the film tells you everything. Directed by Gary Marshall and written by Leslie Dixon, Overboard cost $22 million and made $26.7 million. A result the studio called disappointing and history called wrong. Today the story has been retold across 4 countries and counting. Today we're counting down 15 facts you didn't know about Overboard, the production disaster on a completely different film that accidentally created this one, the writer who called the premise too hokey to work, and the night Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell forgot what they were about to do, because their own film came on TV. Before we dive in, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films that shaped us. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the disaster that made this movie possible. In 1983, Jonathan Demme finished his cut of Swing Shift, a World War II film about women working in a California factory while their husbands were overseas, starring Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. The critical success of Melvin and Howard had made him one of the most exciting directors working. He assembled a cast that included Christine Lahti, Ed Harris, Fred Ward, and a young Holly Hunter. He shot his version. Then Goldie Hawn watched it. She didn't like what she saw. Her production company was involved, she had approval rights, and she felt Demme's cut had lost focus on her character at crucial moments. Hollywood gossip had it that her real concern was Christine Lahti, who was stealing the film. Warner Brothers sided with Hawn. In December 1983, the studio ordered reshoots, 30 additional minutes of new scenes. The budget climbed from $14 million to somewhere between $15 and $17 million. The release date moved from February 1984 to April 1984. Demme and his editor Craig McKay walked away rather than, in Demme's own words, participate in work we didn't believe in. He kept his directorial credit, but had his name removed from the advertising. The screenwriter, Nancy Dowd, asked to be credited under a pseudonym, Rob Morton, a person who does not exist. The film opened in May 1984. It grossed $6.6 million. Demme called it the worst experience of his career. Steve Weinberg, writing in Sight and Sound, tracked down bootleg copies of Demme's original cut and called it one of the best American films of the decade. Here's the thing. During the making of that film, during all of it, Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell fell in love. The production that Hawn tore apart is the production that built the relationship that made Overboard possible. 3 years later, her company developed Overboard specifically as a vehicle for the two of them. Demme went on to make Something Wild, Married to the Mob, and The Silence of the Lambs. And the worst year of his professional life accidentally became the foundation of someone else's hit. Number 14, the writer who called her own movie hokey. Here's the thing about Leslie Dixon. She came to Hollywood with no contacts and no credits. She talked her way into a job as a script reader, studied every script she processed for structure, sold her first screenplay to Columbia Pictures for $30,000, and watched it never get made. Then she co-wrote Outrageous Fortune and wrote Overboard solo, both produced, both released in 1987, same calendar year. Dixon didn't pitch Overboard. She was hired to write it around a premise handed to her, a woman with amnesia based on a real incident. Her response when she read the brief was to find the whole device hokey. The word she used, on record, too thin, too implausible. An amnesia story that expects you to accept it as a romantic setup felt to her like the kind of contrivance audiences would laugh at rather than with. She wrote it anyway. She invented the class warfare engine, the carpenter who gets cheated, sees his opportunity, and takes it. She structured the scenes with enough wit that even the critics who hated the film tended to praise the script. Roger Ebert, giving it 3 stars, credited the genuine charm generated by the cast and director. Variety called it uninspiring, but praised Hawn's performance specifically. And Hawn's performance is built almost entirely on Dixon's dialogue. Here's the kicker. Years later, Dixon said the film had endured for one reason only. Not the script, not the direction, but the 2 people in front of the camera. She gave Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn full credit for everything the movie became. The woman who nearly passed on the project wrote the structure that held 2 of the best screen performers of the decade in place long enough for their chemistry to do everything else. And then she was honest enough to say so. Number 13, the screenwriter, MGM, wouldn't let near her own film. In August of 1987, 4 months after principal photography wrapped, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner reported a rumor. MGM was refusing to let Leslie Dixon see the finished film, or the final draft of her own script, because, the rumor went, she would not recognize it. MGM's spokesperson denied this immediately. Dixon's representative issued a statement saying Dixon had no problems with anyone connected to the film, and was looking forward to seeing it in a few weeks. That is the kind of statement you release when your representative has advised you not to release any other kind of statement. What we know, the AFI catalog records the Herald-Examiner report as fact. What we don't know, the extent of the changes between Dixon's shooting draft and the final cut, because Dixon, who went on to write Mrs. Doubtfire, Freaky Friday, and Hairspray, has never said publicly in any interview whether she recognized the film when she finally saw it. That silence is its own answer, or at least it raises a question the promotional materials never asked. Dixon was barely 2 years into her professional career. She had no leverage. The studio had the film. What she did have was the knowledge that her name was on it, and that, whatever the film became, she had built the thing that made it possible. That she may have watched the finished version for the first time in a theater, like a stranger, is just the last irony in a fact full of them. Number 12, The Yacht That Survived, 2 classics and then burned. The SS Immaculata, Joanna Staton's gleaming monument to everything wrong with inherited wealth, was not a prop. It was a real vessel, a 130-foot Kong and Halverson motor yacht built in 1984, known during the Overboard shoot by the name Yacht. The Hollywood Reporter, during production, described it as so ostentatious and tacky that even a billionaire arms dealer might consider it tasteless. Crystal chandeliers, velvet cheetah upholstery. That was not a set decoration. That was the boat. The Yachts arrived in Fort Bragg's Noyo Harbor for filming, escorted in by the actual United States Coast Guard because the harbor entrance was narrow and technically demanding. The Coast Guard conducted a routine law enforcement boarding. A former service member from that unit later posted online that they had no idea they were part of a movie, only realizing it later when they recognized the vessel, and themselves, in the finished film. The entire escort sequence as the yacht arrived at the harbor was real. Real sailors, real procedures. No one told them the cameras were running. Meanwhile, the yacht's rocking motion was causing production crew members to fall asleep mid-shoot, just gone. The ocean had no interest in staying on schedule. The Yachts was later purchased and renamed Atessa, and in 1993 it appeared again, as the luxury vessel of Robert Redford's wealthy character in Indecent Proposal. 2 films about class, money, and how the powerful treat people beneath them. Same boat, sold again, renamed Huntress. It then caught fire and sank off the coast of Greece in 1998. The crew and passengers all survived. The yacht that had spent a decade representing cinematic excess ended exactly as dramatically as it deserved to. Number 11, the Hollywood archivist who chose the wrong job. Roddy McDowall plays Andrew the butler in Overboard. 10 minutes of screen time, give or take. He pours drinks, raises eyebrows, and delivers the quiet horror of someone who has watched his employer be exactly this person for years and made his peace with it. It is a perfectly calibrated small performance. It happened because McDowell was supposed to be doing something else entirely. McDowell was a child star who had worked with Elizabeth Taylor on Lassie Come Home in 1943, won a Tony Award on Broadway, and built one of the most varied careers in Hollywood history. By the mid-1980s, MGM had hired him for an unusual assignment: go through the studio's archive of old, abandoned properties from the classic era, find material worth reviving, and bring it back. He was, in effect, an archivist with producing authority. The job was to look backward. Instead, McDowell read Leslie Dixon's new screenplay. He connected with it immediately, arranged to serve as executive producer on the picture, and then, rather than take a lead role, chose the butler. Not because it was the best available part, because McDowell understood instinctively where he fit in the story. He was himself, the keeper of Hollywood's secrets, a man who had known everyone from the golden era, remembered everything, and was famous for never repeating it, loyal, discreet, and always in the room. Andrew the butler, devoted and quietly horrified, was Roddy McDowell playing his own myth. He was hired to find old stories worth telling. He found a new one and stepped inside it. When he died in 1998, whatever he knew about 50 years of Hollywood went with him, which is honestly exactly what Andrew the butler would have wanted. Number 10. The director's condition on every film he ever made. Gary Marshall had one non-negotiable on every film he directed. It wasn't about casting. It wasn't about the script. It was about Hector Elizondo. In Overboard, Elizondo plays the captain of the garbage scow that fishes Joanna out of the ocean. 2 minutes of screen time, not billed in the main credits. He is in the film because Gary Marshall would not make a film, any film, without him. Elizondo appeared in all 18 of Marshall's directorial projects: The Flamingo Kid, Pretty Woman, Runaway Bride, The Princess Diaries, Beaches, Raising Helen. Northwestern University's archival record of Marshall's papers states it plainly. Marshall insisted that Elizondo have a role in every film he directed, not as a favor, as a condition. Marshall himself cameos as the drummer in the bar. His son Scott plays the Coast Guard spotter. Kurt Russell's father, Bing Russell, plays the sheriff. The film's supporting architecture is a family tree. And then there's the Pee Wee Herman situation. The youngest son, Joey, does an impression throughout the film that is not in the script. Jeffrey Wiseman improvised it on set after Marshall encouraged the cast to find things. Marshall was reportedly heard calling, "Jeffrey, stop it," at Wiseman between takes, which only made it worse, or better. Marshall kept it in the film because he was a director who understood that the best moments in comedy can't be written. They can only be allowed to happen. Number 9, John Candy, was supposed to be in this movie. Let's talk about John Candy for a moment. Billy Pratt is Dean's best friend in Overboard, the loyal confidant who keeps the plot moving, the guy who invests in the miniature golf course, who makes the Coast Guard connection, who shows up when Dean needs someone to talk to. As written, Billy is large, warm, instantly likable, and accidentally funny at moments designed for someone else. The role was offered to John Candy. Candy said no, not because he didn't want it. He said no because he was already committed to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Released the same year, 1987, directed by John Hughes. In that film, Candy plays Del Griffith, a lovable, large, warm, instantly likable, accidentally funny man who shows up when someone else needs him. The two roles were, structurally, almost identical. John Candy could not be in both films, so he chose John Hughes. The role went to Mike Haggerty, a Chicago character actor who became one of the most dependable supporting players of the following 25 years. 5 episodes of Friends, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Wayne's World, Austin Powers, Lucky Louie. Haggerty made Billy entirely his own. Here's what's wild, though. John Candy in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles gave one of the most beloved comedy performances of the decade. If he had taken Overboard, that film exists differently, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles needs a different Del Griffith. 2 movies, 1 scheduling conflict, and the entire comic fabric of 1987 shifts. Number 8. One of Dean's sons. Went straight to Tom Hanks. Jared Rushton played Charlie Prophet, one of Dean's 4 sons. He was 13 years old during filming. His job was to be difficult, to glare, to scheme, to make Joanna's transition from yacht owner to housewife as miserable as possible. He was good at it. He had, in Gary Marshall's loosely improvisational environment, just enough freedom to be genuinely menacing without tipping into parody. The following year, Jared Rushton played Billy Kopetsky, Tom Hanks's best friend in Big. 1 year removed from terrorizing Goldie Hawn on a California soundstage, Rushton was anchoring a scene on a giant piano keyboard with a man in the middle of his breakthrough. Big grossed $151 million worldwide against an $18 million budget. It earned Hanks his first Academy Award nomination. And buried in the credits, next to Hanks, is the kid who had just spent the previous year making Goldie Hawn's on-screen life a living comedy. Rushton then went into Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He got a Saturn Award nomination for that one. He retired from acting in 2000 to play music. The career arc, from Overboard to Big to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, to the Saturn nominations to the band, is one of those trajectories that makes complete sense and would have been impossible to predict. It started with him being as annoying as possible on a California soundstage for Gary Marshall. Number 7, the premiere that contradicted every review. Overboard opened on December 16, 1987, on 1,126 screens. Opening weekend gross, $1.88 million. The film never reached number 1 at the box office. In 6 weeks of wide release, it totaled $26.7 million on a $22 million production budget before marketing costs, which means the studio essentially broke even in theaters and hoped for the rest. The reviews were a procession of disappointment. Variety, uninspiring. The Washington Post, a deeply banal farce. The Los Angeles Times, nerveless and thin. TV Guide, neither memorable nor particularly funny. Here's what none of those reviews mentioned. The night before wide release, on December 15th, Overboard had its world premiere at the Cineplex Odeon in Century City as a charity screening for the Women's Guild of Cedars-Sinai. The event raised $450,000 for the hospital. The AFI catalog records this in a single sentence as a production footnote. A film that the critical establishment was busy calling a banal farce opened to a charity gala that raised nearly $500,000 in a single evening. The critics weren't wrong about the film's flaws, but a movie that could anchor that premiere is not what the reviews described. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave it an A-, which means the gap between what critics wrote and what people who actually saw or what it felt is the entire story of Overboard's reception. The press called it mediocre. The people who saw it disagreed. When it hit VHS in June 1988, it became one of the top 10 rentals in Canada within a month. Cable picked it up and played it indefinitely. The reviews turned out to be the least relevant thing anyone wrote about it. Number 6. The 8-year-old who would become a movie star. The Overboard set in Mendocino in the summer of 1987 was, by every account, a family production. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell had their kids with them. Wyatt, 9 months old, was there. Kate Hudson later told Entertainment Weekly that Wyatt took his first steps on the set. Kurt Russell's father, Bing, plays the sheriff. Gary Marshall's son, Scott, plays the Coast Guard spotter. Marshall himself plays the drummer in the bar. And then there was the 8-year-old. Kate Hudson, Goldie Hawn's daughter from her marriage to Bill Hudson, was on set that summer. It was, she said in a 2004 People interview, a true family experience. She described living in Mendocino while the film shot, running around the set, absorbing everything. And she met Gary Marshall. He was so memorable as a kid, she said. You don't forget him. Marshall, for his part, said Hawn and Hudson were pretty much the same person. He wasn't wrong. Hudson went on to study acting and land her breakthrough in Almost Famous in 2000. And after that, it was Gary Marshall who cast her in Raising Helen in 2004 and Mother's Day in 2016. The director she first encountered on the Overboard set when she was 8 years old gave her 2 of her adult leading roles. None of that was planned. None of it was written into the production schedule. It's just what happens when a set is this full of people. Someone 8 years old watches closely enough that it changes what they become. Number 5, the numbers that tell the real story. By any conventional measurement of theatrical success, Overboard was a modest disappointment. The studio needed a bigger return on Goldie Hawn. Protocol in 1984 had underperformed. Wildcats in 1986 had underperformed. MGM acquired Overboard specifically as a vehicle to revive her commercial standing. That's documented in Grokipedia's sourced production history of the film. They brought in Russell, commissioned Dixon, hired Marshall. The film they built got mixed reviews and a box office return that barely covered its production budget. VHS rental, cable licensing, repeat viewings. The kind of success that doesn't show up in opening weekend reports. The accumulated hours of an entire generation finding a film on a Saturday afternoon and staying. Overboard became one of those films. Kurt Russell said in interviews that Overboard and Captain Ron are the two movies he most commonly finds already playing when he boards other people's boats. There is something almost perfect about that. A film about a yacht discovered on boats by the man who made it. The 2018 gender-swapped remake earned more than 7 times its production budget, on a story the original told 30 years earlier. If the original had done that, nobody would have called it a disappointment. But the original had a different job. To exist long enough to build a reputation the theatrical run couldn't create. It succeeded at that completely. The reviews just weren't measuring the right thing. Number 4. The real relationship under the fake one. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell first met in 1968. She was 21, he was 16. Both cast in a Disney musical called The One and Only Genuine Original Family Band. Hawn thought he was charming and much too young. She filed it away. He built a career, she won an Oscar. They reconnected in 1983, you know where. And what followed is the part the promotional materials for Overboard never quite said out loud. Russell asked her out. His opening line admitted to Conan O'Brien, "Man, you got a great figure." He said it came out fast and could have gone wrong. She said, "Why, thank you." They went out dancing. By 1984, they were together. By 1986, they had a son. By 1987, they were making Overboard. What makes this matter for the film is what Leslie Dixon said about it afterward. Not the script, not the direction. Dixon credited the two leads entirely, said the film endured because of Russell and Hawn, and that they were the movie, full stop. 19 years of history before the cameras rolled. You believe Dean and Joanna fall for each other because two people who had already done exactly that are playing it. That's not chemistry you cast. It's history you point a camera at. Number 3, the career it was supposed to save, and what it actually did. Goldie Hawn in 1987 was by Hollywood's ledger struggling. Protocol in 1984 had underperformed. Wildcats in 1986 had underperformed badly enough that Roger Ebert wrote the formula. Wide-eyed Goldie copes with the real world had worn out altogether. MGM acquired Overboard, specifically as a vehicle to reset her commercial standing. That's why Dixon was commissioned. That's why they pushed for Russell. The studio needed a hit for Goldie Hawn. Overboard did not give them that. The theatrical return barely covered production costs. Critics dismissed it. Hawn didn't receive an Oscar nomination, a Golden Globe, or any award recognition for the performance. By every measure the studio was tracking, the project had failed its purpose. And then something happened that the studio's metrics had no column for. The film kept being watched, not in theaters, on VHS, on cable, on Sunday afternoons, when there was nothing else on, by people who found it and told other people, by kids who grew up with it. The story that was supposed to save Goldie Hawn's career didn't do that. It did something the studio never asked for and wouldn't have known how to measure. It became the kind of film people love, in spite of knowing better. That's rarer than a hit, and it took about a decade to see it clearly. Number 2, the night they forgot what they were doing. In 2020, Goldie Hawn appeared on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen and told a story. She doesn't watch her own films. She finds it uncomfortable. But one night she and Kurt Russell were at home, the television was on in the background, and the movie came on. "It was us. It was us and Overboard," she said. So the two of us forgot what we were going to do, and we ended up watching the movie. And then, it was so fabulous how we started looking at what we did together. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, more than 30 years after filming, stumbled into their own movie in the dark. The film the critics savaged. The film that never cracked the top 5 at the box office. The film that was supposed to rescue a career and didn't. And they watched the whole thing, not as an exercise, not for an interview, because they couldn't look away from what they'd made. There is no review that captures what that moment is. There's no box office number. It is just two people 3 decades on, who made something together during the years they fell in love, and found that it still held them. Whatever else Overboard is or isn't, that's what it contains, and that's why it's never going away. Number 1, the premise. Everyone said wouldn't work. The critics called it banal, 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. A theatrical run that left the studio roughly where it started. By every conventional measure, the verdict in December 1987 was clear. This premise, this film, this gamble did not pay off. And then the counting started. One 1992 Bollywood adaptation starring Salman Khan. One 1997 Malayalam film in India. One 2006 South Korean television series. One 2018 Hollywood remake, gender-swapped, $12 million budget, $91 million worldwide, with Leslie Dixon receiving a screenplay credit, even though she wasn't directly involved in production. That credit exists because the structure she built in 1987 was intact enough, 31 years later, that a new film required its acknowledgement. Total count as of 2026, 1 premise, 5 productions, 4 countries, 4 decades. The woman who dismissed the premise as too thin to carry a film built something so structurally sound that 5 different creative teams across 4 decades found something worth retelling inside it. The studio measured success in opening weekends and got back roughly what they put in. What they actually made was one of the most durable romantic comedy premises in the history of the form. Everything that came after, the remakes, the adaptations, the cult, the 2 real-life partners accidentally watching it in the dark 30 years later and forgetting to look away, was Overboard doing what it always did. In its own time, at its own pace, which, for a movie built around amnesia and the slow discovery of who you actually are, is the only speed that was ever going to work. And there you have it. 15 facts about Overboard. Which of these hit hardest? Tell us in the comments. And tell us which film we should wade into next. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.